I don't hate artists. Some of my best friends are artists. I just don't get why they get to choose whatever they want to do, and I don't.
This constant narrative about how important the arts is because it contributes economic benefits. I'm sorry, this is not the point of art. That is a secondary point.
There was a reason why samizdat was so important, for example, in Soviet Union as a second culture. And with my colleagues, we even try to lower the technical aspect, even use more simple methods.
I don't think art is a feather in the cap. I think it is a fundamental social good where everyone has the right to culture.
It's not just Stravinsky or Beethoven. We all own it.
Hello, I'm Daniela Nivaso, the writer of the show, and an artist myself. Art has always played a vital role in our society. It reflected the ideas of our times, it has imagined possible futures.
Yeah, but what's the use of it, though? What does art even contribute to society? The world is burning and we're trying to find the means to survive this mess. Haven't you watched the news lately?
Art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth and...
Oh, come on. We are living through war, genocide, and the planet is heating like a kettle on a stove. I don't have time to look at a lie that enables me to whatever.
I know, these are difficult times, but that's exactly why we all need a break. To escape into a book, a film, a series, or a theater play. Art can give you a time out and take you somewhere else. It allows you to feel your feelings and understand the world from a bit of distance. I mean, what did you all do in COVID times besides baking and knitting? You escaped into art.
I worked overtime and homeschooled 3 kids. And at night, when I couldn't sleep from anxiety, I was watching series, and listening to podcasts. And I was very jealous of those creators because they got to create art, which I didn't, because ultimately the only people who can afford to create art are the students whose parents pay their rent and the professional artist who never had to pay rent in the first place.
What?
Yeah, you heard me. And if you forgive me, I am entitled to my 15 minutes of respite and I'm gonna play some video games.
Who do you think created that?
Hello and welcome to Standard Time, a talk show exploring a wide array of European matters and why Europe matters. I'm your host, Reka Kinga-Pop, and each episode I'll be joined by thrilling guests from all over Europe, and I promise I'm not always this negative. We release new episodes every second Thursday, so don't miss out. Hit the subscribe button and set at least 7 alarms so you always know when an episode drops. Also, don't forget to turn on the subtitles in one of the 15 languages we offer. That's right, we got you covered. Let me know in the comments what your mother tongue is, though. Today we set sail with the European Pavilion, an art project that explores Europe's future and the question of our European culture altogether. The idea is simple. At art fairs, individual countries run the exhibits, which greatly influences what they put on show and how they frame their cultures. But if this logic is sound, shouldn't Project Europe have its own pavilion? Well, it does now, thanks to the European Cultural Foundation, also our founder and funder at Display Europe, and the people who make this talk show possible.
This year's theme for the European Pavilion is Liquid Becomings, in which 4 custom boats sail 4 major European rivers, the Tagus, the Vistula, the Rhine and the Danube. The 4 journeys cross 11 countries, traveling 1,400 kilometers with artists aboard.
Okay, that sounds nice, but what are they doing on these boats, like fishing?
The visual and performing artists, writers, architects and designers are doing residency on the boats where they work on their projects, and at the end of the journey there will be a 3-day festival in Lisbon from the 7th to the 9th of November where all the artists present their respective art pieces and eat a lot of pastel de nata.
So they're having a nice boat trip? This all just sounds like a hyped up holiday.
More like a work trip. They're creating there, but let them have their moment. Do you know how many starving artists there are out there? They're working on their project in an environment where they get to connect with these rivers that have been the drivers of human civilization for millennia. And we happen to have 3 of them here to tell us more about their view on art and their artistic work.
Naomi Russell is the founder of Agora Now and the lead curator of the European Pavilion 2024. She is a creative producer, curator, movement builder, activist, advisor, and entrepreneur who has worked with many other world's leading cultural institutions and artists in the performing arts disciplines. Viktor Vejvoda was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia. There he studied at the Academy of Fine Arts and graduated in the studio of New Media. His main interest lies in the ecology of consumption, peripheral and forgotten knowledge, and the questions of value and improvisation. Maria Balubčić is a Belgrade-based musician who performs under the alias Umbra. In her improvisation-based compositions, she uses voice, keyboard, and electronics. Maria is the composer of the Liquid Becoming soundtrack, Motiv.
Hi, welcome and thanks for taking the time passing through Budapest. But let me start with you, Naomi, the curator, because you are a serial enabler of artists doing stuff that is not necessarily self-explanatory. So please tell me about what artists have to do with imagining futures. This is sort of this is basically your profile. You focus on visions for a future, transformations. What the hell do artists have to do with that? Aren't artists just like a feather in our hat who make life a little bit prettier?
Well, some people might like that narrative. I completely disagree. Art is always a place of futurity. Artists always imagine, see, think about the future in their practice. And my perspective is that we need those imaginations and those practices right in the middle of society. And connected a little bit actually to this project is a quote of Gus Speth, who is an American academic and the founder of the World Resources Institute, which focuses on climate. And he said just a couple of years ago that scientists believed that by hammering out the facts about climate, that people would change their behaviour, their approach, their consumption. But actually he was wrong. And he says this, that what we need is a cultural and a spiritual transformation. And this is what artistic practices, artistic work does. It allows us to zoom out, to think differently, to be transformed. And so I don't think art is a feather in the cap. I think it is a fundamental social good, which is also included in the United Nations Constitution of Human Rights. It is Article 27, where everyone has the right to culture.
So what does an arts project have to do with this imaginary, and why specifically rivers?
We felt really strongly that to reimagine anything, we had to go to where people were and not only expect them to come to us, so not to do it in a typical centre or a city, to go to the perimeters. And to do that, we needed to be on the water. It was the only way, this sort of neurological system of rivers that connects the whole world, these bodies of water, that we could do that. And furthermore, of course, to step onto water, to be in nature, or in some cases to be on water in man-made nature, which is going to be the Rhine journey, it meant we had to step into a space of unknowing, an uncertain space. So to step into a space of unknowing, to step into a space of complexity, and allow ourselves to think and feel together within that space was really important. And that's how we ended up on the rivers.
There is still this weird distance between the everyday practices of culture and big institutional culture, which are held up as like the pinnacle, which is what the opera house and the museums, which, let's be honest, a very small fraction of the population actually get to enjoy. Independent culture is much more vulnerable. My understanding, and correct me, Maria, if I'm wrong, but at least in my impression, the type of arts and culture that people do engage with most closely on a daily basis is music. So if somebody has never been to a contemporary music performance, classical or otherwise, what do they imagine so that they're not scared to step in?
Luckily, music has a way of really holding space for people. And this is exactly, I think, what people crave. And that actually is really difficult because in independent music, You can't really program this. You can't really write a passage and then things will evolve this way. It really happens spontaneously, and someone can go to a theater and there can be a crazy experimental track or something like this, then that puts them to research. So from some other context where I come from, not even theaters are anymore a safe space, because Serbia, for example, cut the budget significantly. It's a total panic state of mind right now. So even
we're sister countries in this. We're very much. Unfortunately, our governments are encouraging each other down this path.
But I have to tell you, because I am kind of one of the few in Belgrade, knowing that there's a scene in Prague, in Antwerp, in Vienna, in Budapest especially. Budapest is a jewel of independent music scene. And there are still actors with some real things going on, like UHA Fest, for example. Something like this does not exist in Belgrade. So it's very difficult to keep track, to find continuity, and to keep encouraging ourselves like within the city of Belgrade, for example. So this is why for me personally, and I even have a radio show about it, connecting between the cities is really crucial.
It has more of a sort of accidental and spontaneous side, right? And that also kind of makes it more vulnerable in a sense, because you need the space and the opportunity and the sort of creating the event for this to happen, right? So it's not a lot of experimental music, of course, happens in somebody's bedrooms and then gets published here and there. But this, in order to closely engage with an audience, for instance, you need the space, right?
Not only the space, you get me a wrong kind of speaker and everything changes, you know? So it's really about the entire constellation. The room, the speakers, the tools you use to generate sound. And I think what is maybe the most interesting thing in this contact with the audience, unlike strictly pop music or classical music locked in its form and dramaturgy, here it really depends, wait a second, what did I hear now? They react to this, okay, maybe I tell more of this. So it's really structuring. So people receiving this music, I think they feel that they are contributing to this exchange and to this structuring, which makes this music, I don't know, for me, even more special.
But this is also really important in terms of what you said about how these well-funded opera houses, theatres, institutional structures are so out of reach and so separate from the vast majority of the population. And if we, as artists, as cultural workers, or indeed as institutions, really believe that art matters, how do we create this more porous space where people can step in, they can encounter, they can have an opinion, they can interact in some way?
Now, if you like what you see and if we manage to make you laugh at least once, please support our work and go to patreon.com/Eurozine. This is the magazine presenting this show. You can pledge as little as €5 a month or whatever you can afford, and you'll get access to bonus materials, early access, and even get to suggest topics and questions.
I think simply because this academic and institutional structure of what we now sometimes term still as the high arts or the fine arts comes from an elite concept of culture where the plebs is not supposed to engage with this or not supposed to access this. They are expected to know this, and if they don't, then that kind of defines their class station. But let's just talk a little bit about self-publishing, which basically that's what we're doing here as well. It's a glorified form of samizdat in a sense.
I think all of us, as members of society, we need something which is called and known. And immediately in my brain was running experiments of my art collective Kolkhoz and Trojan Tactics with establishing some kind of these platforms. And even for established institution, it can be, for example, the Museum Café or some place where there are more reasons than one to come, visit, meet, sit together and somehow like process in more down-to-earth way. And something this third space logic is connected with self-publishing. There was a reason why samizdat was so important, for example, in Soviet Union as a second culture. For me, it's always interesting in my practice that samizdat is as important now as was important. And with my colleagues, we even try to lower the technical aspect, even use more simple methods. And somehow by making things simple, and I think I answer many of our questions more simple, more down to earth. Things become more clear and even easier for us.
I mean, heat paper is the worst medium, isn't it? It just disappears in a little bit of time. It's full of BPA. It has a funny touch.
We are using thermal paper for publishing. I even brought some samples printed on thermal paper. The formula is changing. There is no more BPA anymore. And these days, if you buy this paper, you get guarantee between 7 to 10 years of stability if it's stored in dark. And in a way, I find even big poetics inside of publication which will disappear because it's big motivation for a reader to read it, share it, until it's gone.
And how people get to engage with culture even if they don't come through institutions of culture, because the classic path is that you go to an art school, whatever, then you go to an arts university and then you're officially an artist and that's what you do and you're entitled to art, whereas everybody else is doing accounting and whatever. Is the artist who comes through this academic path, this institutional path, really entitled to more than everybody else? How do we see art as a vocation meeting with everybody else in this space?
In the last 30 to 40 years, as there's been this hand of instrumentalising and extraction, also in the cultural sector, the way you're expected to report, the way everything has to be defined, what are you contributing, how are you constantly useful, economically useful? Yeah. This constant narrative about how important the arts is because it contributes economic benefits. I'm sorry, this is not the point of art. This is not the point of art. That is a secondary point. And this has influenced as well how artists experiment or don't, create, produce, tour, and start the whole thing again. It's a sort of conveyor belt, like a supermarket. And products that people are expected to make are also meant to be based on their previous success. But this is how programmers, including of important festivals and institutions that say they are artist-led and say they are interested in the new, are still conditioned or forced, perhaps, to think about things. And what this does for the artist is it prevents them taking these risks, even if they have the money to. And of course, many, many, many don't, because the money follows products, whether it's subsidies, whether it's co-production, whether it's other forms of
funders
resource.
like to give money where money already is present, right?
There is a saying in Dutch, maak het concreet, make it concrete. What's it going to do? And so this idea of process and testing and opening up space, which I also believe would be better for the audience, to be players in the process of making and to understand the process of making better, it just doesn't really exist. And it's a huge hindrance everywhere. And it never is it more a hindrance, and this has been amplified since the pandemic, for independent artists. And it's independent artists, like other forms of activism, who actually build the commons in public space, who build relation, which is also, I think, what Victor was talking about when he says, it doesn't matter if it's only a few or they tear it up and give it to people. This is about how we value the exchange between one another. And this is what we now need in order to build a better society and in order for shifts to happen. And there's no room for it. There's no time and space for anybody to think in this way.
I very much relate to this. We hear this all the time in cultural publishing. Why don't you make a revenue? If you don't make a revenue, don't realize a profit. Where is your place? How many millions of people are reading you? And if just the process of meaning making doesn't seem to be enough.
My experience, let's say, because I went through music school as a kid and then music high school and music university, during high school I was engaged with the independent choir, kind of invited, let's say. The circumstances had it that I was already, when 17, I was kind of, you go to music school, you're the conductor. And I was like, oh, what, okay, you know. So the most fantastic thing was that there were people from all different fields, walks of life, and everybody was older than me, right? So this is where I maybe learned more about music than from the music school. My strategy is to kind of empower people so that they feel, kids in school, in formal, it doesn't matter, that it's not just Stravinsky or Beethoven. We all own it.
And this separation of making and acknowledgement that exists in the artistic field, isn't this also what is causing alienation everywhere because of workers and this complete separation economically from the fruit of my labour? So there are all these parallels then between what we experience in our elite, more sort of niche fields wherever we are, and also just the state of economic reward and identity and a sense of belonging and a sense of optimism for the future.
Yeah, I think this concept of the audience being completely separate from the art is it's a very sort of modern and in that sense quite European and very elitist approach, which then sort of culminates in my mind in Richard Wagner closing down the doors and being fed up with people coming and going during performances. They shouldn't live their lives, they should just sit there and pay close attention to my greatness all along. The reason I'm trying to provoke you all is because in the general discourse about engaging with art, the audience is still a separate mass, most often, who is supposed to perceive and then give feedback in the form of buying tickets or buying a product, right? So they're ultimately perceived of in mainstream culture as consumers. And you guys work with a completely different concept where there isn't really a fully separated audience.
But spectatorship is a Western construct. You don't have this binary if you are working with young musicians or even just the community using music in the favela. You don't have that separation. Everything is much more close. But more profoundly, when you see the real impact of this work, its depth in terms of how culture then really connects and has a profound impact. It might not have an impact that they go to music college, if that's meant to be the result. It has a different kind of impact that is about creating a social and a relational tissue that we have lost in our advanced societies. But I also think we need room for both. I used to work at the Young Vic Theatre in London, and we had a programme called the Two Boroughs Project where we specifically raised money to enable every single person who was a local resident, there were about 100,000 of them, could come to the theatre for free. And they could come once and they could see what it was like. It's about saying, this is your theatre, come and just try it, and we're going to make it as risk-free as possible. And our artistic director, David Lann, used to say, but if you want to leave in the interval, that's okay, because that's what intervals are for. And dare I say it, he and I leave at intervals occasionally, because we don't appreciate the work. It's like we don't have to finish every book. We can have an opinion, we can decide if it's for us or not.
Okay, what emerges from these rivers though? Because you guys are working on 4 European rivers this year, and the boats themselves are the means of engaging with the rivers, but the artwork as well. Why exactly rivers? Europeans don't seem to pay a very close attention to rivers recently. They used to be a huge part of national imaginary, just like look to Polish literature, Ukrainian. Like here in Budapest, the river is the middle of the city. It's 2-way highways on both sides, and that's it. Why engage with rivers, and what can you change about our relationships with them with a project like this? Maria, maybe we can start with you, because you wrote the theme song, which is very liquid. I'm not an
you.
art critic, if you can tell.
Yeah, thank you very much, because at some point I need to put on the side all this contextual thinking and really just get a little bit rid of the language so that I could be more open to make the actual sounds. So in the sense I needed to become, as you know, I do these characters, I go into character and stage character or whatever, and then I create something. So I was thinking, like, what is this kind of movement? First of all, what is this kind of feeling that would enable me to be there like a fish from under the surface of the water, or to really like engage with the light, which is reflecting on the surface of the water, to feel like I'm hitting the rocks everywhere and that there's some annoying people on some boats there trying to connect with me. So how and what happened was that the most natural kind of gesture, let's say, or behavioral in sound-wise would be an arpeggio, like you know. And so I delved into this. I took some, let's say, wet plucked instrument, added some shimmer with the flute, and
So you don't observe the water, you kind of impersonate the water.
I've seen my portion of the water. You know, Belgrade is on 2 rivers, and I am engaged. And I kind of discovered that the arpeggio itself contains these layers, like do, 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 do. So they would be behaving in time when you listen, when you give in.
I think that's for me the river, lake, sea. It's really making for us things clear, because you see left, right, something open, and in the same time it's a great filter. So my trip, the sailing, is still waiting. I done recently some experiments. How is it to live on coast? How to try publish while free wild camping. I think it's great filter, because whatever you manage to do while you still managing surviving on river, on sea, it's already filtered, because it's actually very hard after all day of physical work and mental work to keep the trip, keep the boat, do something. And most probably in my imagination, you left with pencil and paper to make a few notes, and then maybe a source out of them after the trip is done. But somehow about this temporality and ephemerality, I'm really looking forward for this limited situation. I think it's always crystallized us.
But it's sort of a withdrawal, or I wouldn't necessarily go to a cleansing, but somewhere along those lines, right? So you are sort of stepping out of a civilizational sort of norm and looking for something else.
I always remind myself it's still living in civilization. It's just slightly less comfortable or less routine.
Have you heard of our friends over at Talk Eastern Europe podcast? If you haven't, well, you should, because this is a fantastic podcast with the editors and contributors of our partner journal, New Eastern Europe, who talk all things regional, including politics, culture wars included, and is just fantastic to listen to. So if you have the time, or even if you don't, give them a listen and you'll be thankful you did.
I want to come back to the idea of solutions. You guys use this in the sort of manifesto of the pavilion. And when we talk about solutions in everyday discourse, solutions are like this engineering type of like, right now, give me a product, make it work right now. What kind of solutions, or what are artistic solutions that you guys are looking for? How do we imagine an artistic solution?
These boats are going to be home to 32 artists over the course of the next 2 months. And those artists represent many different disciplines: publishing, choreography, sound, architecture, etc. And they will be exchanging and researching their practices. Performances, end results may get made, but that is not required. These are not production residencies. We imagine some of the crews will create things collectively, whatever that is, what sort of assemblages might emerge, and this will all be shown at the festival at the end in Lisbon. We think, and we talked a little bit about this at the curatorial residency that we had back in April when we selected the artists. We were thinking about, can we emerge from this journey with tools for joyful living and survival? And I think that a really important thing that we also hope will happen is that it gives you this enrichment and fuel to be able to act and to be able to become in the world. And as I was preparing for this interview, I went back to Ursula Le Guin. There were 3 texts, not Ursula Le Guin actually. There was a Chantal Mouffe text, Paul Preciado and Donna Haraway that we drew on when we were creating our curatorial concept. And she wrote after the American elections in 2016 this piece, drawing on Lao Tzu's text, The Way of Water. And actually the American election is going to be 2 days before our Lisbon festival. So who knows how we will respond to that in November. But she talked about how we have a choice to act and not to react, to break the paralysis of fear and this vicious circle of aggression, to be able to go forward onward. And that's, of course, what water does. And in our curatorial proposal, we also talked a lot about monsters and about ruins and about the trauma that is carried, not only colonial, but in individual people's lives. That's, I think, where these rivers, this interconnectivity really comes in. And of course, they all then flow to the sea. And that is the great Imaginarium.
I will be supportingly watching over you guys from home with my feet in a basin of warm water. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
For the conversation.
Now we want to know, what do you think about art? Can it save us? And who gets to call themselves an artist? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and I may just choreograph an interpretative dance performance of the top comment. And while you're rummaging down there, give us a like and subscribe to our channel. This talk show is presented by Eurozine, and if you haven't heard of it, you should check it out right now, because this online magazine trades in a scarcity item, and that's insight. Eurozine publishes thoughtful long-form articles from more than 100 partner journals across dozens of European languages, and you have access to it all for free. Display Europe is the force behind this project. It is one of the only content sharing platforms that offers you articles, podcasts, and videos about European politics and culture in 15 different languages. And yes, they don't even abuse your user data. I know it's unbelievable, but it's true. Go check them out at displayeurope.eu. This program is co-funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union and the European Cultural Foundation. Importantly, the views and opinions expressed here are those of the speakers and the authors only, and they do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Neither the EU nor the EACA can be held responsible for them. Not that we would mind them taking advice from us.